Welcome back. Last week we looked at how we can use repetition and for loops to make our code smarter and more powerful, and our coding a lot more efficient. Reusing parts of the code that we've already written saves us time. This week we'll be looking at how we can start choosing which pieces of code are executed in a program by making decisions. In our everyday lives, we make decisions based on the information that we have. For example, if it's raining, I'll take an umbrella. If it's not raining, I'll leave my umbrella at home. But what if it looks like it might rain? What's the key word here? If. If something happens, then I will base my next set of actions on what has happened. We also follow instructions based on information we receive. For example, if a traffic light is red, I'll stop at the lights. Otherwise, if the light is green, I'll continue to drive through the traffic intersection. In this module, we are going to learn how we can use conditions in our code. By including conditions, we can instruct the program to make a decision about which statements in the code are to be executed without having to rewrite the code each time we run it to rearrange the order of statements. The condition that we define must be able to be interpreted as true or false, because the program has to have a definite answer. If the program tests the condition and it says that the statement being tested is true, then the defined set of statements in your code that depend upon the condition will run. Otherwise, if it returns false, the statements will not be executed. The following text is a statement that we use to make conditions in our code. If parenthesis test close parenthesis curly brackets statements. Let's use this statement in combination with the rules for traffic lights as an example. If traffic light is red, stop, else continue. To see a real example, let's say that your program can't handle numbers which are negative, less than 0. We check a variable x to see if it's negative, and if it is, we set it to 0. For this example, we've defined 0 as the smallest valid number. If x less than 0, x equals 0. While we said that the if condition encloses statements in the pseudocode, it can be a single statement as shown above. We start with the keyword if, follow it with a condition that must be true or false in parentheses, and then use curly braces to indicate to the program which statements we want to execute if the statement is true. Indenting, spacing in, the statements in an if statement is a great way to make them stand out so you don't accidentally read them and think that they're always going to be executed. Remember, the statements in the body of the if will only be executed if the condition is true, at the point where the program checks it. Unlike a loop, we don't check the condition again once we reach that bottom curly brace. It's checked once. The code in the body is run or it isn't, and then we move on. Remember our flowcharts in the previous lesson? Let's have a quick look at what branching looks like when mapping it on a flowchart. Okay, now we've got that concept sorted. Let's try that on some code that we've seen in the previous video. Remember that I said that we could set color values greater than 255 because processing was well behaved and treated larger values as if they were 255 in the color range? Well, not all programming languages do this, and we regularly use if statements to check to see if important variables are still in the right range, where the range defines the largest and smallest values that we consider to be legitimate values in our program. We know that the loop will execute 5 times, and that means that coltrack, the variable we use to keep track of how much red we want, is going to move through the values 0, 64, 128, 192, and 256. But this final value is larger than 255, and in many programs, this could give us some quite unexpected results when we try to use it in a place where we should only be using 255. We can put an if statement after the coltrack update to check to see if it's still in the right range. And now every time we go through that loop, the if statement checks to see if we're trying to set coltrack to too large a value, and it sets it back to the correct maximum. Now, I have to note that when there's only one statement, you don't need to use the curly braces in the if, but it's a really good habit to get into because it makes the code that may not be executed stand out, and it also lets you easily add code later to the conditional body without getting it wrong. You can have as many statements as you like inside the body of a condition, but always make sure that the condition you describe is something that can happen in your program or your code will never be run. Here's some more range checking inserted into that program. Now we've said that the red value must be from 0 to 255, but could it ever be any less than 0? Let's look at the code. Call track starts off by being set to 0 in a part of the code that must always run because it's outside of any loops or if statements that use conditionals. Then the only thing that can happen to call track is that it can get bigger or eventually be set to 255. The code in the body of the second if statement will never be run, but the computer will still check to see if it should be, which can slow your program down over time. There's lots more to talk about here, so let's get on to the next video.